Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we're going to be looking at errors in our thinking, or as we call them, thought errors. We're going to do that with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for telling my sister she was wrong for telling our parents why she doesn't want kids? Bit of a wordy title.
Yeah, we're starting off really early with lack of communication, aren't we?
I always knew I didn't want to have kids. I don't have any specific reason for not wanting children. I just lack the desire, and I strongly believe that the question should be, why do you want kids, instead of why don't you want kids? My older sister was very vocal about wanting to have children in her early 20s, but now that she's in her late 20s, she's changed her mind. Our parents never liked that I didn't want kids, but they didn't care much about it either, since they knew my sister would give them grandchildren. But now that she's changed her mind, they are panicking. They invited us both over to dinner, then, quote, confronted us on why we don't want to have children and demanded a reason. I told them I just simply lack the desire, and I expected my sister to do the same. But instead, she threw me under the bus. She decided to perpetrate the child-free stereotype and said that she's too lazy and selfish to have children. She doesn't want to start her mornings with making breakfast, getting the kids ready, and taking them off to school. She's just too lazy for that and doesn't want to give up her nice vacations and hobbies. Thanks to her, now our parents are bugging me too and believe I'm a selfish and lazy person. I told my sister she was wrong for telling our parents that's her reason, and she should have thought about me before opening her mouth. My sister said she has every right to tell our parents whatever she wants, and it's not her fault they are the way that they are, and that I can't stand up for myself. Am I the asshole? All righty. Thought errors.
Oh, boy.
Jess, take us through good old thought errors.
Thought errors aplenty here. So CBT, I think, is almost becoming like a household acronym at this point with social media and stuff. But one of the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea,
CBT.
or CBT, as it's becoming the household name, is the idea that you have a thought, the thought produces an emotion produces a behavior. There's more that goes into it with triggers and core beliefs and feedback loops, but that's the gist of it, that's the order of operations. Thoughts have a feeling, feelings have behaviors. So sometimes when our thinking becomes distorted, all these other chain of events that happen are problematic because our starting point is a little twisted. So we call these, cognitive distortions, thought errors, irrational thoughts. These are all kind of words that we use interchangeably for this. So the main issue with thought errors is that they do not pass what I call the useful and true test. So if a thought is not both useful and true, then continuing to think it is irrational. So I give my favorite, I think we've all had this thought, I don't want to go to work today. Most people have had that thought. Is that thought true? Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to go to work. That is true. Right. But if I don't go to work, I'm not going to get a paycheck, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So is that thought useful? Not so much. That's not going to give me like outcomes that I'm really wanting. So continuing to think, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to go to work. I want to go work. That's going to make me feel agitated, trapped, whatever. I'm going to choose not to go to work. I now have had a negative outcome. However, if I can reframe that thought and say, I don't want to go to work, but I'm really looking forward to payday, that might produce kind of a different side of this. So I think what's going on here is that we're getting into thought errors pretty early on, and that's really kind of tainting almost every part of this kind of interaction here. The first one I noticed right off the top is she says, I strongly believe that the question should be, why do you want kids, instead of why don't you want kids? So should is the word that my little antennas go up on. So I teach clients, this is the thought error of shoulding all over yourself. So But that's easy to remember. Like, oh man.
Yes.
So if in your own mind you're noticing the thought should, we're going to check in on that. That thought is problematic because that thought is saying, I do not want reality to be as reality is, and I'm distressed because of that. Right? So do I believe that that's what the question should be? Yeah, I'd probably like that. Is that thought useful? No, that's not reality, right? We're going to ask the questions that are most applicable. Statistically speaking, most people have kids, right? That's just going to be what happens. That's how the conversation's going to go. So that was the first one I noticed. And I think that the rest kind of stems from that, of whatever reality is in the situation, as I don't like that. I don't want that to be that way. What was the next one you noticed?
Before I go into that, I'm actually going
Oh.
to add on to yours and piggyback
Please do.
that with shitting all over yourself, we could actually link in
Yeah.
shoulda, woulda, coulda's.
Did
Because
it?
it's the same
Yeah.
concept of we're attempting to distort reality with these thoughts. Like, oh, I could have done this. You could have, but you can't go in the past and change it. So that's not really useful unless we're maybe doing an autopsy and the purpose is specifically to think about what we can do better the next time. But a lot of times when we're shoulda, woulda, coulda-ing, we're not doing that in a useful and productive manner.
I hear this all the time with people's relationships with exercise or diet, even health. Oh, I really should be going to the gym. Oh, I really should be eating better. And I'm like, but are you going to the gym? Like, well, no. Like, okay. So like we keep like shaming ourselves of like, oh, I should be doing this. Nobody's been like that. Really, I'm so inspired to just hit the weights today. I shit it all over myself. Got me. It doesn't get you anywhere, you know? And so I think what we can say, you know, I value fitness. The gym is a way to do that, but I'm feeling tired and probably not gonna make that happen. So let me figure out what else I want to do with my time instead of just shaming myself over these things that I should be doing. But I heard that all the time about wellness. When does this come up for your clients, you think, the shoulds?
I do a lot of boundary work. So it's like, I probably should have set a boundary there. Yeah, we probably should have.
Shoulda, coulda, woulda, didn't.
In that manner, it's usually more productive. Like, yeah, we should have. Why didn't we?
Yeah.
I also get I always refer to it with my clients as like nutrition and movement. We don't really use words diet and exercise.
Same. Yep. I call it that too.
Nutrition and movement goals.
That's
right.
right.
I was like, okay, but we didn't. So we can't really change that. Let's focus on the present week. What are our goals? What were the barriers as to why we didn't do it last week? And what can we attempt to do differently this week?
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes shoulds can show us what is important to us, or maybe what even our values are. Like, I shouldn't tell myself I'm going to go to the gym unless I valued the gym for some reason, you know? So I do think it, you know, in a positive way, sometimes it encourages us to do things differently. But again, I think that's only on the back end of figuring out what's not going well, as opposed to that doesn't initiate action on the front end so much.
Correct. Yeah. And as we think about CBT framework, shoulda, woulda, coulda-ing does typically lead to an emotion of shame, which then usually leads to some behavior that we try to soothe ourselves with. And if we're struggling with nutrition and movement, we may be emotional eaters. And so we've just self-sabotaged and went through this whole process of shoulda, woulda, coulda-ing, shame. Now I'm going to make myself feel better with something sweeter, some type of comfort food. And then I'm going to repeat the process like, well, I shouldn't have done that. Now we're going to feel shame again. And it's just a vicious cycle.
Totally. Yeah, so true. And like guilt and shame are such energy depleting emotions. We're not going to feel like invigorated to go for a jog after we've just been talking mad shit to ourselves for an hour. You know? Yeah.
Absolutely. Good point. Another one I saw was one that we call power thrusting. And so kind of throwing around some importance here. And so feeling her way of viewing the world is more important or more powerful than other people. So when she's saying, this is the question, why do you want kids? It's a bit of a power thrust, and like somehow your framework of wanting children is better. When in reality, it's not any better. And humans are probably the exception of species who's really out there actively choosing, am I going to have kids or not? other animals just have the instinct to mate, and they don't have things like contraception. They're not doing the pull-out method. None of that. They're just out there mating because that's what biology is telling them to do. So when you come in here and say, well, the question should be, why do you want kids? That's not a super realistic question to ask. And your power move there isn't actually a power move. It's
like kind of self-righteous, maybe, or kind
Yes.
of aloofness of like, it's almost being like, I'm so highly evolved that I can break out of instinctual drive to reproduce, maybe something like
Yes.
that. Again, I'm engaging in thought errors because I'm mind reading right now for her,
Yes.
you know. But I think that's how it can feel to interact with the thought, a power thrust thought error of like,
Mhm.
wow, who died and made you king of the child-free, you know, lifestyle, man.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was thinking, I like when she says, you know, they invited us both over to dinner, then confronted us on why we don't want to have children and demanded a reason. I told them I just simply lacked the desire, and I expected my sister to do the same, but instead she threw me under the bus. I guess I didn't even pick up. I expected my sister. Obviously, that's a problem because you're already assuming
Yep.
that isn't even necessarily a CBT thought error. That's just anytime that you expect something, that's a premeditated resentment. If you expect something, you should tell somebody that, right? But my favorite part is the end. She threw me under the bus. I think that that's like a personalization kind of thought error there.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a very egocentric thing of, well, other people should know exactly how I feel about this. And then her reality is somehow damaging to me, or that's like inflicting harm on me. I think that that's pretty irrational. Useful and true. I don't think it passed that test. Do you think that's a personalization one there? Threw me under the
Yeah,
bus?
for sure.
Yeah.
She gave her reasons because those are her reasons. She was simply speaking her truth, and you took that personally and internalized that and said, you threw me under the bus, you harmed me by simply speaking your truth. And that's not the case at all.
Right. The exception would be if they said, hey, mom and dad called us for dinner. They're going to ambush us. We have our own reasons, but we can be private. I don't think we need to give them anything. You know, there's a agreed upon rules of engagement. And then somebody looks you over and winks and smiles and says, I did it because I'm selfish and lazy. You'd be like, you did. We talked about this. You know, I can see that I feel like would not be a thought error, and that would feel kind of blindsided.
Yeah.
But to just
Feel
say,
betrayed.
yeah, I'd be like, you kind of threw me under the bus there. I thought we talked about this, but just to come in hot and to say, wow, your reality is deeply personal to me. That's just pretty irrational, I think, to me. So it's not true. It's also not useful. So this is a really problematic way to think about that situation, I think, too.
Absolutely.
What's another one you found?
Another one I found was blaming stance.
Mm-hmm.
So we blame others for maybe our own situations.
Yeah.
I see this pop up a few times. One, I think we could count throwing me under the bus. We're kind of blaming our sister.
Yeah.
In the bigger sense, she's blaming her sister when really the issue is her parents. Right? Calling you guys to dinner, having this big family meeting to demand why they're not going to get grandchildren. That's the problem. And we're blaming our sister, and that's not really helpful.
Yeah, we're blaming our sister for our parents' conception of us, or
Yes.
yeah. And even too, she uses should again. Should have thought about me before she opened her mouth again. Again, she's not, you know, I just think that assumes that there's like a lot of mind reading there, that you're assuming that other people know what you're thinking. Like she has this huge kind of hidden agenda of what she wanted this to go like, you know, and it's just like, wow, a lot of expectations going in there. But obviously her sister isn't like, my conscious decision is to perpetuate a stereotype. This is my reasoning. You know, I think that that's a lot of like really extrapolating like one person's perspective and saying, well, you're participating in this global stereotype. It's like, damn.
Would you say that might fall under overgeneralization?
Yeah. The parents might be having some thought errors too of overgeneralizing. Well, because my two daughters are related, they must have the same mind or like the same characteristics, you know. And overgeneralization kind of in its widest application is a stereotype. It's saying this one set of characteristics or whatever applies to this big group of people, right? And so I think the parents are doing that in kind of her and how they're kind of applying a perspective to both of them. I think that is a thought error for them too. But I also think the sister, although maybe she is playing into the perceived stereotype, that doesn't mean that those still aren't her reasons, And so
Yes.
I think to say like, wow, you're being such like a basic bitch, like just buying into it, like sometimes some cliches are true for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and I think it's really almost pushing back against that where she doesn't like that that's her reality, but like that is her sister's reasons,
Yeah.
But and I think to take on this vendetta of like, I'm changing the way that we think about child-free lifestyles. It's like, well, you're not doing it by being a huge bitch. you know? I just think that's like, I don't know why she's blazing this trail of trying to change reality and how people view this,
Yeah, absolutely. Not today's topic, but comes back to the communication style. She's very aggressive.
Totally.
And the way she's approaching this, instead of being assertive and say, it really bothers me that this is your reason, or it's really hard that mom and dad are lumping me in when your reasons are not my reasons.
Yeah.
And it would have maybe been helpful for us to get on the same page, or maybe we just both didn't give them a reason. But I think maybe moving forward, we just disengage from these types of confrontation with them.
Yeah. And I think some of these thought errors, just not wanting reality to be reality, taking a victim stance, personalizing the sister, I think it's really clouding her ability to see the conversation that needs to happen here is to talk to her parents, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm concerned that you're applying this to me too. It's important to me that you're proud of me, and I'm worried that you think this about me, because that's not true for me. And instead of having a clarifying conversation, she's trying to control her sister's reality so that she can protect some kind of make-believe perception of herself.
Absolutely. Yeah. You threw in victim stance, which I know we've talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah.
But making yourself out to be a victim in a situation where you're not actually the victim. So when she's saying she threw me under the bus, you're the victim, or you're victimizing yourself. She should have thought about me before she opened her mouth. Again, you're making yourself the victim there.
She did not indicate anywhere in this that her sister had a clear understanding of her views of this, so just have this huge kind of hidden agenda and all these value judgments going on here. And then to say this is directed at me, it's like nobody knows what's going on in your head. Like, how are they supposed to know what they have to tiptoe around and say and not say? Like, that victim stance is not helpful.
Yeah. The internal world is tricky. It's just staying in there.
Right.
It's in quite a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And she's expecting others to mind read, which that's a thought error. This doesn't necessarily come up. It's almost the reverse of that, where that's an expectation, which again, not helpful, because that's not reality. You can't read a mind,
Yeah.
In CBT, there's a lot of different cognitive coping skills that we use, but I generally kind of calling them thought reframing is what we call them. If you were to take the sentence, I strongly believe the question should be, why do you want kids, instead of why don't you want kids? What's a way of kind of reframing that so that it's both useful and true to have it pass the test?
I would reframe that to say I'm allowed to have my reason for not wanting kids, and other people are allowed to have their reason. Is how I would probably reframe that for a client.
Yeah.
I use this phrase a lot with clients. Two things can be opposite and true at the same time. Right? It's like if you have a partner who let you down and didn't meet an expectation, is it true that they didn't meet your expectation? Yes. Is it true that they tried their best? Yes. Are those kind of in opposition? Yes. Doesn't mean that one is more true than the other. Two things can be true at once. So you can have your reason for wanting kids, and somebody else can have a completely different reason for wanting to have kids or not have kids. Yeah. And that's true for them also. Life does not have to be about either or. And a lot of times it's not, because we are complex beings.
Right. And so that helps us maybe tolerate kind of the dichotomy or the grayness of life if we're able to hold both things at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, as opposed to wanting reality to change. Yeah. So that would be, both useful and true. That's a good way to reframe that. What about a victim stance? Do you normally, if you find that that's a really common thought error that a client engages in, do you have them just increase ownership? How do you start challenging?
Yeah. I say, if you guys have listened to other episodes, this probably won't be a new phrase for you. I say, what did you do to contribute to the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you actually the victim? Or is I have them do what we call shifting perspectives or shifting views.
Yeah.
If you really put yourself in their shoes, do you think they did that intentionally to victimize you? Did they intentionally hurt you? Or were you just hurt as a byproduct? Or were you hurt by your own thought processes?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you actually hurt yourself because you set up these unrealistic expectations in your head and left them there?
But
And they're like,
usually, yes.
yes. And they're
Gosh,
like,
no,
oh, shit.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be hard because sometimes you don't know that you have an expectation until it's unmet. And then you're like, oh, I am disappointed. I didn't know that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. What do you use for clients with thought errors? What kind of reframing skills?
I teach the useful and true test pretty early because I want to empower a client to kind of start policing their thoughts, because I think you don't know that you need to apply a skill unless you're aware that you're in a thought distortion. And I definitely think, another thought error is called emotional reasoning, where, well, because I feel this way, this must be true. So because I feel stressed, there must be an emergency. Because I'm angry, they must have done something wrong. And so I call it backing into the emotion. So if you're having, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're at a 6+, that's a good pause to say, what was the thought that I had right before I had this emotion? And I'll encourage people to call it backing into the thought, and then I say useful and true, right? So different clients seem to prefer different tools versus others.
Yes.
I think some people say planting a positive thought would be like, if I have the thought of like, oh, today sucks, a positive thought would be, today's great. And some clients are like, I'm not like gaslighting myself. That doesn't work for me. I'm like, well, that's not what that is, And so I think sometimes they just prefer different things based on their own kind of internal dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But I usually will have the useful and true. And then generally people can kind of figure out what needs to shift to pass that test.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Like,
what's
this
the
day
way?
sucked. Instead of saying like today was a great day, could we say today 70% sucked? Like, that's useful. It lets you kind of know where you're at emotionally
Yeah.
and maybe your irritability level, and it's true. Versus
Right.
saying today was a complete waste. Well, I doubt that's true. That's also
Right.
not useful. You're probably
that's-
feeling pretty unproductive.
Yeah, few things in life are absolute, right?
Yes.
Every time, no one, everyone, completely. That generally is automatic thought error.
Mm-hmm. Always, never.
That's that overgeneralization, that hyperbolic language. So if I say useful and true, some clients like to say, today was a really rough day, but I can handle things, so that's okay. Or tomorrow's a new day, or I learned a lot, or whatever, so they can find kind of their own ways that they need to resolve that. It's kind of what sometimes they need a little nudge or really kind of explicit skill building, but most people can kind of think through that, I think, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. As far as the useful and true test, one thing that came up earlier when you were talking about the thought of, I don't want to go to work today.
Mm-hmm.
And is that thought useful? Sometimes it could be a useful thought if you're needing like a mental break. If you need a day off and you maybe need to call in sick, potentially that answer is yes. That is a useful thought. And so the positive side of this question is that sometimes when the answer is no, like, is this really a useful thought? Well, no, because I have to go to work. We can kind of back into that thought even and say, like, why do I think I'm having this thought? Well, I really hate this coworker, or I really dislike my boss, or I'm really dreading my eval.
Yeah. So even the distress that you feel, that'll take a pause and be like, ooh, what's the kind of iceberg thought is, I don't want to go to work, but below the water, there could be a lot of other things contributing to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think if it doesn't answer yes, then to both of those, then there needs to be some further exploration?
I would say for continuing to grow. This is a new skill. Like, let's just get yes, no. Let's just do step one.
Let's just bring awareness to it, right?
Yeah, but as we're like using the skill and that thought is coming up frequently for us, like, is this useful and true? If that's coming up kind of habitual and you're not having to stop and ask yourself that, it's what in CBT is called an automatic thought. Like, that's the automatic thought for you. Then it's okay, I'm probably ready to challenge myself. If I'm saying, no, this isn't useful, no, this isn't true, why might I be having this thought then?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think it can be really empowering, take the example, oh my God, I had a terrible day. If we think on that and ruminate, we're going to feel depressed, defeated, whatever,
Mhm.
and when you start to say, okay, I don't want to feel that way. Let me revisit this thought. I think that emotional relief can be pretty quick sometimes of like, wow,
Absolutely.
when I can control my mind in how I'm thinking about my perspective, I really maybe inflicting a lot of emotional distress on myself. Maybe
Yeah.
empowering.
A lot
Yeah.
of the things we kind of self-sabotage. We do a lot of things to
Yeah.
ourselves.
I know. Yeah, I guess that'd be kind of a thought error too, huh? That's just maybe negative self-talk in general.
Yeah.
Self-sabotage. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think another part of this is the parents talking about kind of unmet expectations where they're also having to shift their vision of the future too.
Hmm.
Right. So this is them having maybe a hard time managing some disappointments or
Yeah.
some, switching visions of their later in life things, And I think the sister in her response was like, you can't stand up to the parents, which I think is right also, because I think the ownership is on the parents of saying, like, no matter what, I don't get to demand people give me reasonings for things because it's my job to support and love. I don't have to have somebody justify to me why they do or don't want to do something. And if I don't
Hmm.
like their decisions, that's for me to tolerate, But I think from the get-go, I think a lot of this is the parents' bad as well. I think the sister, the lazy and selfish sister, I think that she's the least asshole of all these people. Uh,
Yeah. Sounds like she actually has maybe the best boundaries in being able to just speak her truth and leave it at that. She's not taking it personal that the parents are upset and
yeah.
she's allowing them to have their emotions. She's
Mm.
not feeling guilty for her sister, even though her sister's trying to put all of this blame on her. She's saying that's really a you problem. You need to stand up to mom and dad about that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like she has some pretty decent boundaries going on here.
I think she's really good at kind of like skirting on all the bullshit. She's like, that's some bullshit. That's also some bullshit. She seems kind of naturally to pick up on that.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that comes from maybe she's, she is older, so maybe she feels a little bit more confident where like I can do whatever my reasons are. I don't have to justify that, or maybe the younger sister is perhaps not as confident in herself or something like that, the author, where she's kind of overcompensating by taking on this kind of self-righteous vendetta against the stereotype.
Yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
important to know boundaries are not a way for you to control other people.
Yeah.
Boundaries are really a way to just dictate what you tolerate from other people. And so here she's really trying to control her sister and saying, like, this needs to be your response to our parents. And you don't get to control that. She has every right to give them whatever reason she feels comfortable with. And so she's
Mhm.
blurring that line between control and what I imagine she probably thinks is boundaries.
Yeah. Is there any world in which the author could apply a boundary to her sister and not be a total asshole?
In this particular situation,
Yeah, 'cause I think the author needs to set boundaries with parents, right?
yes.
Or even if this conversation continues, I'm gonna have to leave dinner. Or I'm not gonna be able to come over to your house anymore, or
Hmm.
something like that. I feel like there's not really much that she could say about that.
No, because the sister didn't do anything to her.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
agree.
parents like created this whole environment, set it up, called everybody for dinner.
Hmm.
And so the sister, I think, is the outlet for the frustration with the parents. And I imagine that's because they're on this horizontal dynamic.
Yeah,
So in a systems or a family system, we kind of talk about tiers.
yeah.
You have like the spousal tier where marital problems are handled and discussed. You have like the parenting tier where parenting issues are handled. And you have like a sibling tier. And
Mhm.
so that's all just the kids. And triangulation can happen where parents are talking to the kids about marital problems, or parents are expecting siblings to parent,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's an inappropriate mixing of the tiers. But I think at this point, the sister probably feels safe because they're within the same tier. And now that they're adults, they probably feel more equal. But really, her issue is with the tier above. She needs to go up into the parenting tier and say, like, you're kind of dissolving a bit. Our parents will still have a level of respect for you, but you don't really get to dictate our lives because we're not 5.
Yeah, that's a really good point about tears, and that she is like stopping at the ceiling of
Mhm.
that level and trying to get all the issues resolved in that tier, but that's not going to get done. I think that's a really interesting perspective to have on that.
Yeah.
Mm. If for whatever reason people are allowed to like and not like what they want to like and not like, maybe she could say, hey, if you're gonna continue to talk about yourself and your reasonings for that way, I want to not have these conversations with you anymore. Again, does that make her an asshole? I mean, I don't know. If that bothers her, whatever, that's her own shit. But I mean, I
Mhm.
guess she could say that of, I don't want to really talk about this with you anymore. I know we maybe have this similar life thing, but we're not really sharing this.
That's rooted in avoidance. She's uncomfortable with her sister's reasoning, or she can't tolerate that because maybe to some degree that's also her reasoning, and she doesn't want to own that or feed into the stereotype that she thinks is shitty. And so the result is you're not allowed to talk to me about this.
Hmm.
And so in that regard, it makes her slightly assholey. I'll give her probably 20-25% of an asshole if she were to do that. But if that's the only way she can kind of tolerate that and manage thought errors is to say, I can't have this discussion because I don't have the distress tolerance for it, she would get some points for taking some ownership.
Yeah. And it maybe comes down to like, if this is your reasoning, I respect you less. You're not somebody I want to have a relationship. I don't want to be friendly with the lazy, selfish person. I mean, it could be that too. But yeah, I think that you're right that it's almost more of like an avoidance. Maybe then I don't really think there's an opportunity here for a boundary without kind of being a dick, really. But
Agreed.
yeah. And I think the sister did a good job at not owning up for stuff that wasn't her fault and to putting that ownership back on the author. The author wasn't really able to tolerate that, but I think she did a really good job at figuring out what's going on there.
Yeah. So it sounds like little sister is the asshole. Big sister is not the asshole. And parents are
also assholes.
I would agree with that as well. Parents are also assholes.
Yeah. And again, because they're jumping down in the tiers, they're wanting the kids to resolve their distress when really they need to figure out of like, hey, we have to circle back of how we're going to spend this next stage of our lifespan together. But yeah, they need to deal with those, maybe even that grief or loss of expectation as individuals and as a spousal unit, as opposed to flexing like the parenting tier to resolve that. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, summarize it all for us.
Yes. So thought errors are distorted ways of thinking that do not pass both a useful and true test. So they're a way of viewing reality that brings us distress or causes outcomes that we don't desire. So a good way of managing that is when you're noticing yourself in kind of a high state of distress, to back into that thought and to ask the useful and true and see what you would need to do to resolve that thought or reframe that thought. Oh, boundaries. We follow the formula, if blank, then I. So we're focusing on what we're going to do in a reaction as opposed to trying to control other people. And in terms of tiers, when something is maybe feeling off in a family of origin, maybe kind of checking in on what kind of tiers we're jumping around, maybe help figure out who needs to own what and who's responsible for what pieces. Because if we're going laterally or vertically inappropriately, that's going to be hard to actually assess where boundaries are needed or where expectations need to be curbed. So, and expectations are premeditated resentment. So if you got this big agenda in your mind, people are going to let you down. So like you probably should tell somebody if you want that shit to happen.
I like that one. All right, guys. We want to hear your thoughts. Send them to us at assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.